Hello and welcome to The Print. I am Debdutta here with my colleague Keshav Padmanabhan. The former Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, in an exclusive interview to The Print, has talked about the future of Bangladesh, the upcoming polls, and what lies ahead for the country and Awami League in general, which is now facing an interim ban in the country. She gave a written interview to my colleague Keshav, and today we discuss about the interview and analyze her main points. To begin with, and to give a little bit of context, Sheikh Hasina has been in Delhi since the 5th of August 2024 when a student led uprising led to the fall of the Awami League government. An interim administration led by Muhammad Yunus has been in place since then, and Bangladesh heads to polls next month on the 12th of February. This is a key election, and a lot of people want to know what is going to happen in that election. There are a lot of interest in the election, a lot has been happening in the country in general. We discuss what lies ahead for the country, the upcoming polls, and more. So, Keshav, to begin with, if you could tell me what was the biggest takeaway from the interview that Sheikh Hasina gave to you, and what did she speak about? I would want to know at large.
So, I mean, of course, because the polls on 12th February is the first time in, 15 years that you're saying an election without the Awami League in the
Right.
running, right? And she was in power for 15 years, roughly. So, the first thing that she spoke about or wrote about in response was the upcoming elections, where she basically said that excluding the Awami League, and I'm quoting what she told the print, is that excluding the Awami League disenfranchises tens of millions of Bangladeshis who simply will not vote. Elections held under such conditions cannot be considered free, fair, or legitimate. Voters must be free to elect the party of their choosing and not be excluded from participating or coerced by door to door activists into voting for the BNP or the Jamaat under the threats of violence or destruction. And she goes on to add that this election, so this transition that has been promised, is nothing more than authoritarianism that's dressed up as a transition away from the Awami League politics. And of course, the polls, as you rightly said, the Awami League has been suspended from political activity. It's a non-Awami League election, and in the interview, she goes on to add that people will simply not turn up to vote. She claims that the Awami League is still the most populist party, and that you know this kind of election, unless the election is free and fair and constitutional, right, that Bangladesh will not really recover from what happened in 2024, and those are her claims. But as you know, Debdutta, and as you've written extensively on, the current zeitgeist in Bangladesh, how do you actually see the polls in comparison to what the Awami League is saying today?
See, Keshav, a lot of what happens in the polls depends on, of course, who are the political parties that go to vote. Now, with Awami League out of the picture, a lot of analysts and experts that I speak to regarding Bangladesh, regarding the political situation, the social situation, tell me that the question is not about what happens. The question is more about who votes for whom now. So there's this, since Awami League is out of the picture, and as you rightly mentioned that it's one of the most popular parties, it's also the oldest party in the country. There's a huge chunk of voters who have historically voted for Awami League, right? Now that Awami League is not in the picture, who do they vote for? These voters are the key base right now, as far as I understand, because all parties are trying to woo them. Because this is what one expert, Asif, he's a former journalist, he's a researcher at the Georgia State University, and he has extensively spoken to the print on this. He classifies it as the floating voters, the voters who are not yet sure whether they want to vote for BNP, they are not sure if they want to vote for Jamaat. As far as my understanding of the situation goes, it will be key to look at how and who these voters vote for. I'm also curious to know from you on that regard that did she speak anything as per on the fact that what does she think the Awami League will do now that they are not part of the election? In a country, election right now, the elections in Bangladesh is something that everyone is looking up to and looking forward to. What do the Awami League members now plan to do? What does she plan to do? How does she look at the entire election? Did she say anything about the historical voter base? And is there, because if you look at a lot of narratives and a lot of local news reports that's going on in Bangladesh, a certain section of BNP has been trying to woo the Awami League voters by saying that, we are essentially the same, and if you look for development, you should vote for us. But then there's also a section within Jamaat which has kind of shifted its narrative, which does not project the kind of radicalism it essentially used to. It's going soft on it, and it's saying that, what, vote for us, we are the alternative. A lot of discussion on the rise of the Islamic parties in Bangladesh and the kind of impact it might have on the electoral results. So, based on that, did she speak anything about, what lies ahead for the future of the party, what lies ahead in the coming elections?
Right, and yes, so uh, I mean, one of her responses and her main thrust of her claim in the written interview to the print was that if elections were held today and the Awami League was free to run, right, it would command overwhelming support, to quote what she said, right? And she says that is why their political activities have been suspended,
To
because
suppress them.
to suppress the Awami League. So what she said and what she says is that the Awami League voters will simply not turn up to vote. And and you would know this, that there is a sense that maybe a third of all the electorate is pro Awami League in some sense, is
Right.
what experts have opined on this, right? So the sense that she's given in her comments is very clear that if so many people don't turn up, right, it questions the legitimacy of these
Of
elections.
the
Because
election as a whole.
so the point that she makes is, this is not reform. You cannot ban the country's oldest and most popular political party and then claim democratic legitimacy. This is what she says. So in her sense, it's a very clear idea that the future of Bangladeshi, the polity in Bangladesh, must include the Awami League, right?
Right.
And she goes on to claim, for example, that you know, Professor Mohammed Yunus had said last year that the Awami League has not been banned; the political activities have been suspended. He gave that distinction. Of course,
Right.
the student wing was banned under their Anti-Terrorism Act in May last year, but the political party remains suspended. Right. So Professor Yunus made this distinction, and she hits out at that distinction in the interview with the print, saying that this is a distinction without meaning, and that as a party that cannot campaign, organize, or contest elections is therefore effectively banned. And that is what she says about the elections and the democratic legitimacy. And the future, in that sense, is that there will be no democratic legitimacy, is the kind of sense that she is outlaying. And with regards to Jamaat, she had multiple points to talk about: the radicalism, the idea that Jamaat was anti 1971, sort of this revisionism
Hmm.
of Bangladeshi history, right? Which she claims that you know the country was founded, and I quote again from the interview, is that the country was founded on secularism, pluralism, and democratic values. The rehabilitation of the Jamaat-e-Islami and other extremist factions threaten the very fabric of Bangladesh. Right? When radical groups are allowed back into mainstream politics, they do not moderate the state. They seek to reshape it in their own image and remove any trace of pluralism. So even if there is this sense of a moderation within Jamaat, her position is very clear that
Yeah.
as an
That, I mean,
extremist element,
I think that's the Awami League's, historically, that has been the Awami League's position. And that brings me to a very critical point on, these diversions and contestations of the 1971 war narratives.
hmm
A lot has been happening around it. Jamaat essentially has always said that we don't agree with the 1971 war narratives. They were not part of the liberation brigade per se. And Awami League has always used it as a political talking point, be it in any election. Did she, in her interview or in general as well, I would like to know your opinion on it, on what do you think, or how much of a key role do you think these revisionist narratives or the narratives that these political parties are now playing with? Because if I remember correctly, Tariq Rahman, even before he landed in Bangladesh, he, in a video interview on Facebook or in a discussion with the Bangladeshi people, said something along the lines of the fact that we know how Jamaat looks at the 1971 liberation, and we do not look at it the same way. We have a very different, opinion on it, and what we want is basically to keep Bangladesh first. Also, if you look at it from the perspective of the anti-India tirade that has been going on, he made the statement later where he said that not Delhi, not Pindi, but Dhaka, Bangladesh. Within, situating these key parties within the whole electoral foray, and then I'll come back to this question on the new student parties that have been formed. Did she speak at any point on these contestations of these 1971 narratives, or say anything on how this might shape up the future? Also, from that, I have another question before you begin. The part where she says that whatever the results of the election, she does not consider it a democratic election because Awami League is not taking part. Did she say at any point that then Awami League will not recognize any party that wins the election?
Okay, to answer your second part of the question first, no, she didn't make any comment in her responses to that. But to go to your first question about the 1971 revisionism, yes, this is something that Hasina did give a response to. And it was very clear that what she said, and I quote, is that a nation that forgets the price of its freedom becomes vulnerable to those who once denied it. Preserving the truth of our, that is, the Bangladesh Liberation War, is not about politics. It is about safeguarding the identity and Bangladeshi sovereignty. Right? So she's quite clear about the contestation and the
Yeah.
revisionism, and she,
I also
says
feel
that
like she's taking a direct dig at Jamaat.
yes, and we've seen, for example, Dhanmondi 32, the house of Sheikh Mujibur
Yeah.
Rahman, I think thrice has been vandalized and now has been destroyed, right?
Yeah.
And she sort of comments on that, saying it's a deeply concerning trajectory for Bangladesh, one that risks fragmenting Bangladeshi society. And this is interesting because Bangladesh has had a diverse, I think the last estimates was about 8 to 9% of their population happen to be Hindus,
Right.
right? And you're seeing this contestation play out between India and Bangladesh as well, because protection of
Yeah.
minorities has become a main point that India has consistently raised, even when Prime Minister Modi met
Yeah.
Professor Yunus last year in Thailand. So she mentions that. She says, she talks about this deliberate erosion of historical truth, right? Will sort of, fragment the diverse society that Bangladesh has, and she comments and adds more on that, talking about how the violence that you're seeing now in Bangladesh, right, is uh, because of a lack of semblance of law and order,
Hmm.
right? So it's sort of a sense of connecting the whole situation down in what is happening there, and that's her point of view. Of course, I mean it's contested because of course Hasina is sitting in New Delhi at an undisclosed location still, and this is how she has, at least to the print, sort of described the views of Jamaat, the perceived radicalization in
Yeah.
Bangladesh, and how the elections, in her view. And I don't think the Awami League has so far claimed anything on whether they're going to recognize or not recognize the elections. I think
Interesting.
some of their ministers have, at different points, most recently, I think earlier this week,
Yeah.
commented that they still consider themselves the de jure government, right? That de facto, that's on ground,
Yeah.
you may have an interim government, but by law, the Awami League is still the government. And so that's something that she also writes about to the print, is that, there is no legitimacy in any of the changes that Professor Yunus has done because it's not from any constitutional backing.
So, Keshav, a lot of debate and discussion centering the Awami League has been on their refusal to acknowledge what happened in 2024, their refusal to provide any kind of accountability, which a lot of people have pointed out, which in a few recent interviews, even Hasina's son has talked about how they take accountability. And the UNOHCR report that came, which said that 1,400 people had lost their lives in the protest, has been widely contested by the party itself. Did she at any point mention about how Awami League looks at these protests? What does she think went wrong? What happened? Does she mention anything about, the trajectory from 2024 to now, when we see, like you mentioned, we see a lot of them interacting with the Indian media, a lot of press conferences, and mostly these press conferences are rebuttals of the UN report. So, what did she share? Any kind of thoughts on the report per se, on the whole issue?
Yeah, so look, the answer she gave on this question was in two parts. The first she says is that she regrets the loss of every life.
Okay.
But then the second part is she defends the government's actions because she says that the actions were guided by the instinct to protect Bangladesh's institutions and to prevent any loss of future life. Right? So you have the current administration in Dhaka, led by Professor Yunus, has made it clear that there are 1,400 people who have been killed, mirroring the UN OHCR report,
Report.
which was used, I think, as a part of sentencing Hasina to death
Right.
at the International Crimes Tribunal in Bangladesh, right? And so what she says is that, you know, the protest itself, as she says, was welcomed, that they were legitimate protests and they were by students and they were allowed to proceed peacefully, right? And that the government was listening to their demands, that there was, overturning the public sector job quotas, right, which was the source of their frustration. She
Right.
did this in 2018, I think, or
Yes.
2019.
2018.
2018, and then it was overturned, I think, on the 2nd of June by the courts of Bangladesh. So that's where the protests start. So her claim, at least in the interview, is that this was already taken, this was an action that they took, and that, these were demands that they were listening to. However, she goes on to add that, she could not have seen the turning point when extremist elements hijacked the protests, right? This was no longer a spontaneous and peaceful student movement, but a violent mob organized and directed by Yunus that sought violence, attacked police stations, and destroyed state infrastructure. Like any legitimate government, actions were guided by the instinct to protect the country's institutions and prevent any loss of life. So there is, and this is something that a lot of leaders of the Awami League. So this is how the Awami League is looking at the protests: is that they're looking at it saying that the early days of the protests were peaceful and legitimate, and then they were hijacked, and they were hijacked. And Hasina very clearly says that they were hijacked on the orders of Yunus, right? And she goes on to add that there was a judicial inquiry which she ordered into the deaths during the protest, and this was one of the first things that Professor Yunus overturned when he assumed power as the chief advisor, I think, on the 8th of August or 9th of August when he assumed power in 2024.
8th.
8th of August, right? And she says that that is the problem that she has, is that it was dissolved, the inquiry was dissolved immediately upon taking power. No doubt because he knew that it would expose the meticulous plan he orchestrated. Of course, I mean, these are allegations.
Yeah.
Professor Yunus has, I mean, India has recognized and worked with Professor Yunus in the current government, so there is an acceptance that these are former Prime Minister's statements. But that's the view that she has given, and it's something that the Awami League leaders have
Yeah, it's
mirrored.
in line with their,
Yeah.
the defense that they have been giving for the last 2 years, I think.
Yeah.
To end this, I mean, there's a lot to take away from this. I also think that it's also part of, their reaching out to the Indian government before the elections or to the Indian media house. There's a lot of, if you look at it, there are a lot of ways to look at or dissect why this is happening now, the timing and all. But before I end this, I would like to know one final thing: that did she talk anything about what next for Awami League from here?
No, I mean, she didn't comment on that, but she did. I mean, her party has maintained that they're ready to stand for free and fair elections, and I think it was their former education minister, Mohibul, who again a few days ago in Delhi,
Naufal.
Naufal, who said that they're willing to stand for free and fair elections as long as there's a different caretaker government in power. To quote him, right? He says there's no trust with the Yunus government. If there is a different caretaker and Awami League is invited, they will stand. So it's an interesting, I think, change where they are
Yeah.
trying to
I think
hedge.
they are also trying to change their tack now
Yeah.
when they have, kind of seen what went around in the past
Yeah.
2 years. These narratives of how the revolution might have turned into a counter revolution. I think they have seen, they have observed, and now they have chosen to speak up right a month before election. So that's a very interesting point to note. Keshav, based on what she has said, a lot has been happening in Bangladesh even recently. She clearly discussed about what has been happening over the past few years now, 2 years now since she fled Dhaka. But recently there was this massive anti-India protest after this political leader who was one of the key faces of the student uprising, Osman Sharif Hadi, was assassinated. He was shot at the day after elections dates were declared. And I feel like the country's trajectory post Osman's death and sorry, pre Osman's death and post Osman's death has been very different. It has shifted the way the elections are being looked at. Did she at any point talk about the killing of Hadi, the allegations that Awami League members who had gone from India to attack him and then came back to India, did she address any of those allegations?
Right. So she spoke about, and in her response with regards to the question of Hadi and the 2 days of protests that you saw between the 18th to the 20th of December,
Right.
because his death was announced on the 18th of December. She says that violence that you witnessed, right, that the lack of law and order is because law and order cannot be maintained by fear or selective enforcement.
Okay.
Right. So that is how she views the situation. She says that the violence that you're witnessing in Bangladesh is a direct result of an unelected administration that lacks any popular mandate and has allowed politics to be usurped by extremist factions. So once again, she, you know, pins the blame
Rise
uh,
of extremism.
the extremist factions, right? And very stingingly says that instead of delivering reform, the interim government has elevated radical groups, right, to positions of power, established rule by mob justice, and suppressed legitimate political voices. So there is a sense that, in her view at least, that the violence that you saw for those 2 days was a direct result of any lack of democratic legitimacy of the Yunus administration. Which also, in the larger interview, as and once
Yeah, it
people
ties
do
up
read the
with
full,
her.
it ties up the entire argument that the Awami League is making, is that you need to have free and fair elections with the Awami League. Otherwise, it lacks democratic legitimacy. And therefore, you're seeing the situation unfold in Bangladesh today. And she says, there's no semblance of law and order. The Yunus government has routinely failed to act decisively against violence. Indeed, it has actively emboldened extremists who seek to spread their hardline ideology through daily acts of brutality, repressing any trace of pluralism in our society, and dismissing any diversity of thought by labeling any dissenting voice as a political enemy.
I think that's also important because I think she, in a way, is also, discussing the attack on minorities, something that India has been talking about repetitively, and the way she, her answers have these words like attack on the diversity, attack on the pluralism of the Bangladeshi society, which I think is important. I mean, you cannot deny the fact that the whole Bangladeshi movement or the fight for independence was never on religious or communal lines. It was always based on identity, it was based on language. So pluralism has been a key aspect of the Bangladeshi society at large. So I think when she says that, I mean, keeping with the Awami League narrative, she pins the blame on this non-democratically elected government, like you said. But I think she also, makes a direct reference to the repeated attack on minorities, which I think is an important point of concern, which is something that I think will play a key role even in the coming elections. But on that, a lot of key points to talk about, a lot of points to ponder upon, and a lot to look forward to. At that point, Keshav, I think this was a very important interview given at a very critical juncture, right when Bangladesh heads to polls in less than a month now. And, voices like these, former PM, whatever the history and all, it does matter. And given their, massive outreach to the Indian media, what form, shape Awami League takes from here on, post the elections, remains to be seen. But for now, this is Debdutta for The Print, joined by my colleague Keshav. Thank you for joining this discussion.